Grab your beverages and turn up your interweb. It's time for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Matt McKeek here with the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast Week 4 Preview Edition. Unfortunately, my fellow co-host Adam is he's on IR this week. He's had a little minor procedure on the foot, so he is out this week. But I am pleased to be joined by a fellow friend of the podcast, Paul Deal. He is a friend of mine, and I'm going to let him talk to you guys about his past in fantasy football and why he likes fantasy football so much.
What's up, everybody? Thank you, Matt. Happy to be here. Happy to join the podcast. And I'm happy to share some fantasy knowledge with all of you. I've been playing this game we all love, fantasy football, since about 2010. Never in more than 3 leagues at once, and really the past couple of years I've tried to back myself down from fantasy leagues that I'm in. Now I'm in 2, tried to just be in 1 this year, but came in second place last year, so I have to redeem myself.
Oh, yeah.
That league is with some high school buddies that I have taken home first place 5 times in the last 7 years in a variety of ways. They had to end up adjusting the playoff format in the first couple of years. 8 out of 10 teams made the playoffs. This was like participation league.
What the hell?
And I would sneak in every year as the 8th seed, upset all the top seeds, and route to a fantasy championship.
Beautiful.
They knocked it down to 6 teams, and the year they changed it, I was the 6th seed, and once again knocking off top seeds.
That's great.
Good buddy of mine who would always win the draft. He would get the A grade in Yahoo, have the most points in the entire season, always be the favorite going into playoffs. He and I always matched up because I was that bottom seed, and he is no longer in the league. I've successfully chased him out of it because he couldn't take losing in the first round anymore.
Poor baby.
Yeah, he just couldn't handle it. So that is a little bit of my fantasy background. Typically, PPR league is my style, but I'm in PPR and non-PPR this year, so
cool. Having to
deal with a little bit of both.
There you go. That's how you stay up on your toes.
Absolutely is.
So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to the rest of the season. If we can get you on a couple more times, that'd be great too. So as I said, Adam's not here today, but he did want to help out you listeners with some recommendations for daily fantasy football. So far this week, he's really liking Zeke. He's got a great matchup. He's the running back of top value that he would pay up for. Kamara is another one of those top dollar running backs that he really likes. As far as the cheaper running backs, he says go Giovanni Bernard. He's a steal if he's healthy. And if Mixon is out again at quarterback, he likes Eli. He thinks it could be a shootout down there with the Falcons. No, who are they playing? The Saints. I'm sorry.
It's absolutely going to be a shootout down there.
Yeah, right? And then at wide receiver, he likes all the secondary guys again. He thinks there's going to be another wide receiver 2 explosion between guys like Boyd and Mike Williams, Sterling Shepard, and, of course, Calvin Ridley. And tight ends, so far this year, I don't know about you, but tight end has been an absolute crapshoot. We were talking earlier about some trades so far this season, and I actually just made my first trade of the season, which we'll get into in a minute. But at tight end, he thinks Ricky Seals-Jones could be in for a big volume day, so maybe that's a cheaper tight end that you could go for. Or, with Evan Ingram out in New York, with that possibly being a shootout, if you want to stick with the New York Giants stack, you can go with the tight end there.
Rhett Ellison.
Rhett Ellison, the guy.
Rhett Ellison. Remember that name.
So there is Adam's DFS tips for you guys. I hope your DFS is going well so far this season. I'm up about, I think, like $14 or $15, a couple bucks each week. I'll take it. At the end of the season, could be a nice little chunk of change. Go get myself a couple more cases of my most delicious Shipyard Pumpkinhead beer.
Cheers.
And so with that, why don't we check out some of the bye week replacements. Paul, I know you have some notes on some guys that you would recommend as replacements to those big guys that are missing this week, like Christian McCaffrey and Adrian Peterson and Cam Newton. So what do you got for some bye week replacements this week?
Absolutely. On the quarterback side, if we start there looking at the Skins and the Panthers, obviously to me Cam is really the only fantasy relevant person. If you have Alex Smith, I'm assuming there's not a lot of quarterback options in your league. He has put up some numbers, but if he's your starter, ladies and gentlemen, you have bigger issues to worry about.
Yeah.
We've already talked about it a ton, and we're going to talk about it a lot more, but the New York Giants and the Saints game, that is going to be a shootout in New York. So Eli Manning, he is going to be available in your league unless someone is a huge Giants fan and just needs to have all the Giants players on their team.
Right.
So I would go after Eli Manning for this week. And even if you're looking for value in daily fantasy, he could be a nice guy to go after there too.
Yeah, he's fairly cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. Running back side, Christian McCaffrey, AP, Chris Thompson. Trying to replace any of those guys. If Gio Bernard is still on your waiver wire, he's a great one to pick up.
Totally.
I got him last week because I'm struggling at running back with LaShawn McCoy and Leonard Fournette. And he hung, I think, almost 13 points for me in my non-PPR league. So Gio Bernard, if he's out there, scoop him up, put him on your team. The backup running backs for people that are hurt, they're just too hit or miss. The Mike Murphys, the Chris Ivorys of the world, the TJ Yeldons, even though he was banged up last week. I mean, you really got to know what you're doing to pick up one of those guys right now, and I think they're too hit or miss to go after one of them now. So if Gio Bernard's out there, go scoop him up. He's a sure thing. The Bengals will use him, and they'll use him effectively. So
yeah, and I know the Falcons, they are in the top 5 in fantasy point or in receptions allowed to running backs. So definitely in PPR leagues, Bernard is an awesome addition and definitely a guy that you can plug and play in a RB2 slot this week. Let's get into some trade talk. I know you had said, we were talking a little bit before the podcast started about some trades that have gone down in our leagues. Tell me about the trade that we were just talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, so I like David Johnson with this QB change that they have going on down in Arizona, and he has not performed this year, so I'm trying to buy DJ low. And I don't love Aaron Rodgers for the rest of this year, just considering that knee looked like a serious injury when I saw it happen, and he's still gutting it out. But I think one more good hit is going to knock him out for some serious time. So I tried to today trade Aaron Rodgers for David Johnson, got shot down there, but I still think if you're out there, have some value that you can put together without diminishing your roster entirely. David Johnson is someone that you should and could buy low. And really hope that with Josh Rosen, they can wake this offense up and see him start to perform like the David Johnson of old.
Right. Yeah, I think Derrick Henry is another guy that you can focus on trying to buy low on him. I actually saw in one of my leagues he was dropped, which I couldn't believe. And even though I have Dion Lewis in that league, I picked him up anyway. I'm going to stash him. Hopefully he has a big game, and then I can turn around and resell him to somebody. But, this is the time to look for guys to buy low on. You got teams, if they're starting 1-2 or even 0-3, they're desperate for a win this week. You can get away with offering some lowball trades. And, that's if you're not trading, you're not trying in fantasy football. You got to be on the waiver wire, and you got to be looking to make trades. There's always a team that, maybe they're a little weak at running back, you're strong at running back, or the other way around at receiver, tight end. And in one of my leagues, I drafted Greg Olsen. He went down, as we all know. I then picked up George Kittle off the waiver wire. Now that Garoppolo is out, I'm worried about his production with C.J. Beathard. So I was looking at some of the teams in my league that have 2 tight ends. The Kelsey owner also had Jimmy Graham. And so we were in talks. I'm really stacked at running back in that league. It's a standard league, so I really focused on running back in that league. And so I was trying to offer Alex Collins for Kelsey, but he wouldn't budge on that. So we settled for actually Demaryius Thomas for Jimmy Graham. and I couldn't be happier about that. In that league, I have Mike Evans and A.J. Green, so I'm pretty set at receiver. I pretty much only have to worry about those 2 bye weeks. And for Mike Evans, that's next week. And luckily for me, I also have Mike Williams on that team. And Mike Williams has a great matchup next week, so I'll be able to plug him into my wide receiver 2 for that spot. So I'm really happy with the trade. I get to move definitely my 4th best receiver for what could be a top 10 tight end. The position is so hard to predict, and it's so every week. You look at the top 5 tight ends from last week, and probably 3 of them were not even drafted. So every week you can get away with riding the waiver wire, but I hate having to worry every week about who I'm going to drop to pick up some random tight end for the week. So I'm happy with the trade. So again, if you're not trading, you're not trying. Look at some of the teams that are not doing so well in your league right now. Prey on those teams that are 0-3 or 1-2, and use the fact that they need a win really bad to your advantage, and make yourself a trade that's going to help your team out. So,
yeah, the trade I was working on today, that Aaron Rodgers for David Johnson one, I was trying to trade Aaron Rodgers to the guy that's in 11th place out of 12 teams. The unfortunate part is I am the 12th place team out of 12 teams.
Of course.
So, thankfully, that's why you play in 2 fantasy leagues, because the other one I'm 3-0.
There you go.
I just have to deal with the 0-3 in this one.
That's surprising to me. I feel like, unless he has absolutely no running back depth, to say no to Aaron Rodgers. I mean, yeah, like you said, he's got this knee injury, and if something happens, he'll be gone. And to keep David Johnson and not go for Aaron Rodgers when you're in 11th place is pretty surprising.
Right.
So why don't we jump right into our first game, and the game, the Thursday night game,
let's do it.
Which is the Minnesota Vikings playing in Los Angeles at the Rams. What do you got going on for this game?
So as I get into this, the one thing I'm going to be talking about for most of the games that I have is the weather. I think the first couple weeks of the season we've seen some really wild weather, and it has had an impact. And if you want to be a fantasy expert, starting to consider what the weather is and knowing what game flow is going to look like in terms of offenses running their full playbook and passing the ball.
You're right.
Or just sticking to the ground because it's a sloppy day in Washington, so Aaron Rodgers can't throw like Aaron Rodgers can normally throw. It's important to remember. The good thing is we have, at least in the NFC for home games, a fantastic weekend weather-wise. So getting right into this Vikings-Rams game on Thursday night, it's perfect football weather out there in Los Angeles.
Oh, see, I disagree. To me, perfect football weather is 5 degrees with a foot of snow on the ground.
That's what I want to watch.
Us Northeasters, we like those cold weather games. Those guys out in California, that ain't real football, bro.
It's not. But I'm with you. If I was playing Madden, if we were playing Madden right now, we would be playing in an absolute blizzard with 13-mile-an-hour winds going left or right across the field.
But as far as fantasy production, we like the nice sunny days.
This is as close to playing inside of a dome and getting to be outside as well, which I think most of these players enjoy more than being locked up inside. So on the Vikings side, given that I think just going into this week, a lot of people are expecting a defensive battle. You have the Vikings defense, which is a vaunted defense of last year, and then the Rams, much, much improved defense with Sue and all the big names they bought in the secondary. But I think this game is going to turn into more of an offensive showcase than a defensive showcase. The Rams have a lot of injuries in the secondary. It was just announced today that Aqib Talib's going on to IR for a little bit with not one but 2 ankle injuries.
Yep.
And then if you look on the Vikings side, they have a really weird situation going on with Everson Griffin.
Yeah, that is interesting.
He was sent home by the team, ordered to get a mental health evaluation, apparently tried to break into one of his teammates' houses, but then they kind of walked that story back and said, no, he just opened the door and then ran away. But just really weird situation. So I don't know how that defense is going to focus, especially after really getting embarrassed at home last week by the Bills.
That was I remember looking at some of the stats from suicide pools, and more than half of the majority of suicide pools that I saw, everybody is out because of that one Vikings game. It was crazy, man.
Yeah, I'm running one at work, and it knocked out. There's 17 people doing the pool, so it's just a small little thing. Mm-hmm. It knocked out 8 of the 17 people in the pool.
Right.
So it was
at home
ridiculous. I think I've seen Josh Allen hurdle Anthony Barr at least 15 times since it actually happened.
Yeah,
live.
What highlight did we see more of, that or Vance McDonald putting the dirtiest stiff arm in the world?
The stiff arm is definitely the one I like better. But that hurdle was pretty impressive to do against the Vikings defense.
I forget who it was that the touchdown went to, but it wasn't just a weird game where the maybe the Vikings played sloppy on offense and the Bills were able to capitalize on defense. Like, they were out schemed, they were out coached, they were outplayed. There's this one, I forget who it was again too, but it was like a fake little screen pass, and then Allen loaded up and threw a bomb to somebody running down the sidelines for a big touchdown. It's like, it's a rookie quarterback, man. I don't know how you let that happen in your house. As you said, they're one of the best defenses from last year, and this year they've given up the 6th fewest fantasy points to both quarterbacks and running backs, the 8th most to tight ends, but against quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, they've been great, and it was just such a weird game, man.
Yeah, so let's get into some of the players I like. On the Vikings side of the ball, I like Kyle Rudolph a lot this week, and I say that because this is going to go into a little bit of the Eagles' season last year because I'm a big Eagles fan. The Eagles had John DeFilippo as their quarterbacks coach and red zone coordinator. John DeFilippo.
Red zone coordinator.
Yeah, he drew up all the red zone plays, worked with Frank Reich and Doug Peterson to put the best game plan together for when the Eagles were in the red zone.
So, real quick, you're wearing a Philly Special t-shirt.
You know it.
You think that was his doings?
It definitely was part of him, I think, aside from red zone duties. Filippo would also look up all of the trick plays either run in the pros and college, and he would just assemble that library of trick plays for Doug to go through with Frank and decide, hey, let's try and pull this out.
That's awesome.
Because we were talking earlier, the Philly Special itself was actually stolen from the Bears, who ran it potentially against Minnesota 2 or 3 years prior to the Birds pulling it out in the Super Bowl. But I talk about John DeFilippo, I talk about Kyle Rudolph, because last year when the Eagles played the Rams, towards the end of the season, huge game. Their first 3 touchdowns were all scored by the tight end. It was Trey Burton for 1, Brent Selleck for 1, and then Trey Burton for a second.
And that was a game without Ertz, right?
That was a game, yes, without Ertz.
Okay.
So the Eagles still felt like they had a great matchup with tight end. I think the Rams, with their beat-up secondary and the weapons that Minnesota has out wide, and Thielen and Diggs, make Rudolph even more of an attractive start.
Yeah, Rams giving up the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends so far this season.
Yeah.
So definitely, I think it's the best matchup really in this game is Rudolph versus that Rams D. We saw what Jared Cook did to them in the first week when the Raiders really focused on him in the middle of the field. So yeah, it's a great call, I think.
Yeah. So look at Kyle Rudolph this week if you have him. Obviously, you should be starting him, but don't get worried about that Rams defense with Kyle Rudolph. Otherwise, Adam Thielen is another one that I'm liking this week.
Yep.
Even in the blowout last week, he got his numbers. He's a target machine.
Oh, dear. Here we go. This is what happens when you don't turn your phone off, people. Sorry about that. Adam Thielen, he's leading the league in targets so far this season, I saw earlier today, which is surprising. Coming into the preseason, or coming out of the preseason, it really looked like Diggs was the receiver that Cousins had more of a connection with. But yeah, man, I like Thielen more than Diggs this week for sure.
Yeah, Captain Kirk loves reliable hands. I mean, you saw when he was in Washington for all those years with Jamison Crowder. Any big situation, you knew where the ball was going. Any third down, it was going to Crowder. And the two of them always found a way to get it there. I think Thielen is that same type of receiver. Real crafty guy, can run routes well, and when he's open, Kirk will get the ball to him. So look at Adam Thielen this week. On the Rams side, Todd Gurley, obviously you're not going to sit him down just because he's going against the Vikings. He is their offense. I think Sean McVay really recognizes that as well this year. I think there were times last year towards the end of the season especially, you started to see him get away from Gurley and just get out of his comfort zone and try and do more things. That offense completely runs through Todd Gurley, either running the ball or passing the ball. He's a straight-up beast, so don't get worried about Todd Gurley this week.
For sure.
And then Cooper Kupp, another high-volume guy. Since last year when he came into the league, he leads all Rams receivers in targets. To me, he is Jared Goff's favorite target. He's a little behind target-wise this year to Robert Woods, but I'm expecting Cooper Kupp at the end of the year to have the most targets on the Rams. If the Vikings do key on the run and try and shut Gurley down from running the ball, I think the short passing game is how they try and move it between Todd Gurley and Cooper Kupp. So I think a lot of targets are going to come his way if he has to become part of the game plan.
Yeah, and I think Cooper Kupp is probably their best red zone target as far in the passing game outside of Gurley, obviously.
The Rams really. The Rams really. They have Gerald Everett for a tight end.
Yeah, they really don't have a tight end.
They really don't. It's Cooper Kupp work in the middle of the field, and he does it as good as any other receiver in the game.
Cool.
Players that I'm going to avoid in this matchup, I'm actually going to avoid Captain Kirk.
Really?
Kirk Cousins is not a good primetime player. I went back, I looked at some of the numbers. He is 1-4 on Thursday nights with a 500 TD to interception ratio, 9 touchdown passes, 9 interceptions in those 5 games.
Wow.
If you want to look at Monday nights, just focusing on all primetime here, he is 0-6 on Monday Night Football.
Damn, that is a stat right there, man.
Kirk Cousins under the lights is not my favorite quarterback. Fantasy Pros has him as the 18th quarterback in Week 4. So if you have any other option, if Eli Manning's available, go pick him up. I think you could do better than Kirk Cousins this week. On the Rams side, Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks, one of them is going to get matched up against Xavier Rhodes, and he just shuts people down.
Yep. Which one do you think it's going to be?
I feel like they don't move him around. So I think just knowing on what side they're lined up on, I think Brandon Cooks will see him more. Mm-hmm. The Rams will probably try to move Cooks around just to get him away from him. But, Cooks is a pop receiver, so I think the Vikings are smart enough to make sure they don't let him get deep or get behind them for anything. So
right.
I'm staying away from Cooks, and truth be told, I've never really liked Robert Woods as a viable fantasy receiver. I think he's too boomer bust. So I'm avoiding both of the 1-2 Rams receivers this year, or for this game specifically, and focusing big on their slot receiver in Cooper Kupp.
Cool. I like the call. All right, let's move on to an AFC home game. We got a battle in the AFC South here, Texans versus Colts. The Colts defense has played really well this season. Last year, they were in the top 10 in most fantasy points allowed to all 4 of the position groups, and so far this season, they're in the top 10 in least fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends. So they've really made a big turnaround here. That being said, you're still playing Watson, Fuller, and Hopkins. I think the only one you have to question here is Lamar Miller. And after his performance last week, 10 attempts for 10 yards, you don't have to be a math major to figure out that that's only 1 yard per carry, and that's not very good. So he's really got to pick it up. I think if he doesn't this game, he's going to start losing more and more work to Alfred Blue. And they only have 3 more games there without Deontay Foreman, and they're 0-3. So if they lose this game and Miller, has another poor outing, I can see them just really, getting away from Miller, and maybe once Deontay Foreman coming back, really focusing on giving him the lion's share of the carries to see if he's worth taking into next season.
That Colts defense has a ridiculously good middle linebacker rookie too. I don't know his first name, but it's Leonard, the last name. I just know this from watching the Eagles game last week, and they're talking about stats from when they played the Packers the week before the Colts. And I think this dude had 15 tackles in the Packers game. He's just a ball hawk. He's everywhere the ball is. So, yeah, I'm with you. Lamar Miller is definitely someone to watch out for. I think game flow got in the way last week with him running the ball, but I don't think he has a better opportunity this week to find holes running the football.
Yeah. And on the Colts side of the ball with their running back situation, Marlon Mack was out last week, And neither of the two running backs on the Colts really stood out. Wilkins got 6 attempts and 2 catches. Hines got 5 attempts and 5 catches. And as an Eagles fan, last year, you saw how they spread the ball out to all those running backs. And, with Frank Reich going over to the Colts, it seems like he's bringing that philosophy of, not sticking to one running back. And, maybe it'll change when Marlon Mack is healthy and he's on the field. And, maybe we see him get the majority of carries there. But, this was one of the backfields that I wanted to avoid coming into the season, and I'm glad I did, because it's going to be a backfield where it's going to be impossible to find that one guy who's going to stand out.
Yeah, they don't have that one guy. Marlon Mack, especially with the muscle injury, is never really going to come back and be the Marlon Mack they need him to be this year. And then Wilkins and Hines are just completely two different style running backs, and like you said, Frank Reich is going to use them to their skill sets and to their strengths. And you're not going to be able to rely on that from a fantasy football perspective.
Yeah. As a Andrew Luck owner in one of my leagues, I am worried about him, man. After the first week when he threw for over 300 yards, looked good. I was like, yes, I got him in the 10th round. I got a steal here. It's freaking Andrew Luck, man. Like he's got as much ability to be a top 3, top 5 quarterback as anybody in the league. And but after seeing them take him out of the game and put in what the hell was his name? Jacoby Brissett for that Hail Mary. Dude, and then Frank Reich said, "Oh yeah, it's just because we're not worried about Andrew Luck's arm." Like BS, man. The dude he missed all season because of the shoulder injury, and then you don't put him in for a Hail Mary. Like they're obviously still not confident in his shoulder, and they're not willing to take any risks. And I think you're seeing that in the way that he throws the ball, all these short passes and whatnot. And you look at the tight end situation there. Yeah, they probably have one of the best duos of tight ends as far as catching the ball goes, not necessarily blocking in Ebron and Doyle. Doyle missed last week, and besides that last drive where Ebron caught, I think it was 4 or 5 passes, the defense was just letting them take all these little short passes, and then they got in the Hail Mary range, and Andrew Luck went and got some Gatorade. So, yeah, I'm worried about him, man. Obviously, if you have T.Y., you're going to play him. But besides T.Y., I don't know if T.Y. and Luck, I'm going to stick with them, obviously. But I don't know if there's really anybody else you can trust on this team right now. Even if Doyle does play this week, I'm not sure if he's really all that much better than playing Ebron. So we'll see as the season goes along if Ebron sticks to maybe a red zone target type of player, whereas Doyle's more of a work the middle of the field from the 20 to the 20 type of player. We'll see.
Ebron got some targets last week in the red zone. He just didn't come down with them. Exactly. So I think the volume is there for him when they get inside the 20s. And if he catches 2 next week, it'll be great if you do end up starting him. But again, it's just the unreliability of the Colts is something to watch out for here as they start to figure out who they are.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to another AFC game, another AFC East game. We got the Dolphins at the Pats. This is an interesting one. Tannehill has been pretty good so far this season. Last week he had 300 total yards with 3 touchdowns. The defense has been playing pretty well. They're really spreading the ball around to all of their players. Kenyon Drake had a horrible game, 7 touches, 10 yards. And, they were in that game the entire time. So there's no reason why he shouldn't have gotten more touches. But that's another reason why this was a team that I was also avoiding. The Drake-Gore splits. Last week it was 7 for Drake, 6 for Gore. It's just, Frank Gore's the man. I love him. He's going to the Hall of Fame. But just retire, bro. You're just.
There's no reason he should get that many touches.
Yeah, they put him in at the goal line. That's fine, But in the middle of the field, it should be Drake. But the Pats coming off of another loss. I saw a stat where Tom Brady has only lost 3 straight games once in his professional career. It was in 2002. That was 16 years ago. So I don't. As a Jet fan, I'm looking at myself, or I'm looking at this game, and I'm saying, what quarterback do I trust more? What quarterback do I think is going to be the more consistent player? And yes, Tannehill's been playing well, but I'm still putting my money on Brady. As much as it pains me to say, he is the best of all time. So the running back situation in New England is starting to get a little clearer here because we got some breaking news on the podcast.
Absolute breaking news.
Yeah.
Here. So the Patriots today placed Rex Burkhead, or they're placing him. He's to be placed on IR. So if you are anyone holding on to Rex Burkhead because you're the one person that thinks they can predict the week that
good luck,
Bill Belichick and whatever their offensive coordinator's name is are going to hand the ball on the goal line to Rex Burkhead 4 times for 4 touchdowns, like they did that one year against the Colts. Obviously not Rex Burkhead, but
who was it? Was it Sonny Gray? Was it
Sonny Gray? I think so. No, that's a Sonny Gray's a pitcher, but it was something Gray.
Yeah, right. He's a pitcher.
Yeah. So Rex Burkhead, he is on the IR. I think it is safe to not wait for Rex Burkhead. I would give him his bags and send him packing if he's on your team, and move on from the Rex Burkhead show because I think it's going to be the Sony Michel show.
Yeah, we saw last week Michel got 14 carries. Yeah, he only turned him into 50 yards, but that Detroit defense isn't all that bad. So Sony Michel is definitely the running back that's going to get the majority of the volume. He came into the season along with Burkhead dealing with a knee issue. I think he had his knee drained in between preseason week 1 and 2. But, he looked good last week. But obviously in a PPR league, you're going to want James White. He leads the team in targets so far this season. Last week he had 7 touches, had about 60 total yards and a touchdown. He's got the trust of Tom Brady, which I think that's probably the most valuable thing in New England is having the trust of Tom Brady. And this team, I think, is going to start to look drastically different. Last week 2 weeks ago, we saw Philip Dorsett have an awesome game, and then this past week he didn't catch any of his 5 targets. Chris Hogan, 3 for 4, 3 catches on 4 targets for 31 yards. But with Josh Gordon coming back, coming back from this hamstring injury when he does, I think this team's going to look a lot different. So hopefully, with him and Edelman coming back from suspension after this week, hopefully that doesn't eat into James White's production too much. But, now with this Burkhead news, it looks like it's just a 2-headed monster down there with the Patriots with Sonny Michel and James White. So if you have either of those guys, you can definitely feel more comfortable with them knowing that Burkhead will not be vulturing any more touches from the 2 of them. So let's move on to one more AFC game, and then we will go over to another NFC game. And unfortunately for me, my New York Football Jets get to play the Jacksonville Jaguars in Week 4 after playing 3 games in 11 days for the first 3 weeks of the season. Then they get to go to Jacksonville and play a pissed-off Jacksonville defense.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, I think Enunwa is the only one that you can trust in this game. I would play him as a flex. You got to have 2 better receiver options this week on your team. But Enunwa leads the team in targets, 29 targets in 3 weeks. Caught half of his targets last week for 57 yards. He looks good, but besides him, I really don't know if there's anybody on the Jets that you can trust. Jacksonville, after losing to Tennessee last week, that was such a boring, gross game to watch. I don't know if you got to catch any of that game, but
miserable.
It was so boring, man.
It was not featured a lot on NFL Red Zone, I think, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, there wasn't a touchdown scored, wasn't it? It was five field goals in that game?
A mess.
6 to
no
9,
touchdowns,
I think it was?
Yep. 9. I think it was 9-3.
9-3, was it? Jeez. So you look at the receiving core on the Jaguars. Obviously, I think we would both agree that Keenan Cole is the guy there. Yeah, after Moncrief had, he led the team in targets in Week 2 when they played the Patriots. They must have just, liked the matchups that he was getting over Cole. But I think Cole's the guy going forward, and Cole is probably the guy in this game to start besides Leonard Fournette if he's healthy. I know you said you have Fournette on your team, so what's that looking like? Do you know what his status is?
I'm scrolling the news now. I think they did expect Leonard Fournette to potentially return last week, and obviously they didn't play him, held him out another week. this could be the week he comes back. And for my fantasy team that's 0-3, I certainly hope this is the week that Leonard Fournette returns to us. I think it's really hurting the Jacksonville Jaguars, too, not having that reliable running game that they can work on. And, I mean, I think they scored all the points they have to their offense's name without Leonard Fournette that week against the Patriots. So
yeah, right.
They desperately need reliable running back help to get that offense moving, because with the play action, that opens everything up for Keenan Cole and the other receivers downfield with Blake Bortles.
Yeah, and just the attitude that he brings to that team. Having a runner like that, besides, having a defense that puts a quarterback on his ass in the beginning of the game, I think having a running back that, looks for contact and wants to hit people, that's huge. I think that reverberates throughout the entire team, and, they're definitely missing him there. I think if he was on the field last week, they would not have lost to the Tennessee Titans, led by, what was his name? Blaine Gabbert? Yeah, I mean, come on.
Oh, yeah.
So let's go to your team, the defending Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles, taking on those Tennessee Titans that we were just talking about. I think I saw that Blake Bortles is going to be playing this week.
Mariota.
Marcus
Mariota is expected to start this week.
Cool.
But I still don't know if he can feel all of his fingers. Mike Vrabel, their head coach, was talking about that he still is having some discomfort in his elbow and can't make all his throws. So, I mean, I was really shocked to see him enter the game last week when the Jacksonville Jaguars knocked out Blaine Gabbert. So, I mean, credit to Marcus Mariota for gutting it out, but I think he is playing hurt, and you should not look at him as a viable fantasy option here. I'm going to start with the Eagles just as the away team here. Someone I think to watch, aside from the obvious tight end choice of Zach Ertz, is Dallas Goddard, the rookie they drafted this year. Week 1, he was pretty quiet, had one target that he ended up dropping, and it turned into an interception. Week 2, wasn't targeted at all and did not see the playing field a lot. Week 3, last week against the Colts, 7 catches on 7 targets, including a touchdown. During training camp in the preseason, they were talking about this dude as an absolute monster in the red zone. And I think you got a little glimpse of it last week when the Eagles went out. They had 3 tight end package, looking like it's a jumbo running set, broke it all apart, and just threw it to a wide receiver who's playing tight end in the form of Dallas Goddard. They know how to draft these guys, so I look to Dallas Goddard as someone that, again, if you need some help tight end-wise, you go out and you get Dallas Goddard. The Ginger Jesus, as he's aptly been called on this podcast before by Kyle, Carson Wentz, sure, there was a little bit of rust last week, and the broadcast was doing a nice job on Fox saying that he doesn't look rusty at all. But, I mean, it was clear if you watch the Eagles, if you're a fan of Carson Wentz, that he was pretty rusty.
But that mobility is still there, so that's the biggest thing.
He is playing mentally. He is playing the same way MVP caliber Carson Wentz would play last year. So if he is on your team, unless you have Patrick Mahomes, you are starting Carson Wentz from here till the rest of the week.
Yeah, I tried to trade for Carson last week. The Leonard Fournette owner in one of my leagues also had Carson, and so I was trying to trade him Yeldon for Carson. He didn't bite.
That would have been a sweet
that
steal.
Would have been a steal for sure.
Otherwise, Eagles news to look out for. Just announced today, Alshon Jeffery was cleared for contact. Last week when Carson Wentz was cleared for contact, Doug Peterson said if he's cleared, he plays. I would expect the same for Alshon. I don't know why they would treat him any differently. I think Alshon wants to get back on the field.
Yeah, and he was a full participant in practice today, too.
So, I mean, I think he's itching to get back out there with the team. There's just been so much talk recently about the Eagles' offensive weapons and how they're lacking on the outside. People are even starting to talk about the Eagles are a sleeper team to trade for Le'Veon Bell, which I hope doesn't happen. So all those teams that are out there hoping that your squad can trade for Le'Veon Bell, I wish you all the best. I don't need him on the Eagles.
There's talks that the Jets want him too, and it doesn't make sense to me either.
He's had a ton of touches his last 2 seasons. Yeah. He's played his best years as a running back in this league. So someone's going to pay the man, but he is not going to be the same man that he once was. So Goddard, Alshon Jeffery, Carson Wentz, keep an eye out on those guys. Jeffery is definitely one to follow leading into Sunday, just make sure he's active. And if he's active, take a flyer on him and go. A cousin of mine actually found him on his waiver wire today.
Who?
Alshon Jeffery.
Really?
Some guy drafted him, saw that he was going to be out for some time, and decided to cut him. And the way the waiver wire was set up, he fell to the bottom because he was owned, and then he was listed as out.
Right.
So he wasn't shown among some of the active wide receivers. So you never know when an Alshon Jeffery is going to be hiding in your waiver wire. A lot of the damage I like to do from just a philosophy of how I play fantasy is Wednesday morning after everyone else makes their waiver wire moves. I just go through the trash pile and pick up anything that they dropped that I think has value.
Right.
So those are my Eagles to watch. On the Titans side, it's not a lot of positive watches. I think we talked about Marcus Mariota already. He's banged up. If he's your best option at quarterback on your team right now, I think it's time to hit the waiver wire and find someone else to work with there. And this is a week for Mariota, and I'm also going to talk about Corey Davis. Corey Davis, I just can't trust him as the wide receiver out there. He should be their lead guy. The Eagles do give up yardage in the passing game, but unfortunately you don't get points for penalty yardage from offensive pass interference. It might be time to move on from Corey Davis and Marcus Mariota. That offense is just too hard to trust. They don't have anything good going for them. It doesn't look like they're going to change it anytime soon. It's not like
they're just
injuries.
too inconsistent.
Injuries aren't really keeping them down. Mariota just really hasn't been able to put it together consistently. And I think some of the players around him are losing because of it. The one guy, if you have him on your team and you're weak at running back or you need a flex, go with Dion Lewis. He is an ex-Philadelphia Eagle, and for some reason, all the ex-Eagles love to put up big points whenever they play against their old team.
Dion was an Eagle?
He was, way back. He was LaShawn McCoy's spell running back.
Really? I didn't know that.
Shady and Dion Lewis. So, I mean, I'm looking at Deshaun Jackson. I'm looking at Shady. Like, these guys, they circle the Eagles game every week on their calendar. I can't say that Dion Lewis would have been the same thing. But I think if the game goes the way I think it will with the Eagles up, that game flow is going to be an option. And the same way Eric Ebron got a lot of junk yardage towards the end of last week, Dion Lewis could do the same thing.
Yeah, garbage time still counts in fantasy.
It certainly does. Otherwise, players to avoid, aside from Dion Lewis, who I just mentioned, if you got to play him, play him. I would avoid the running backs this week. Eagles are 32nd against the run, or first against the run. They're letting up the least amount of fantasy points to running backs, and the Titans are letting up the third least amount of fantasy points to running backs. So both of them are shutting down running backs. The Eagles have too many question marks at running back with injuries to Sproles and Ajayi. Corey Clement, everyone's thinking he's going to come out and do big things last week, and Wendell Smallwood takes over the game. So you can't trust any of the running backs in this game. I would just avoid them all. I think the Eagles are going to roll it up in this game. I would really be surprised. Carson Wentz is just going to get sharper and sharper each week. So I think the Eagles are going to be up big. And then that's when you're going to start to see that pass rush of the defensive line come around. And I don't expect a good outcome for the Titans.
Yeah, they do have a good offensive line, but I think the Eagles' defensive line is the best as you know, as far as depth goes. Yeah, obviously the Rams have probably the best duo of defensive tackles in the league, but the Eagles, as they showed last year, they can just every down they can put in a fresh defensive lineman that will put pressure on the quarterback. That Eagles defense is ferocious for sure.
It's going to be a hot day too, so those big offensive linemen are going to get pretty tired. 82 and humid in Tennessee this weekend.
Yeah, Alshon Jeffery, if he's healthy, play him. The Titans are giving up the second most fantasy points to tight ends after last year. They finished the season giving up the 10th most to fantasy points to wide receivers. So yeah, if Alshon's healthy, definitely play him.
Yeah, Alshon, Ertz, they're your starters. Also Carson Wentz, Dallas Goddard, interesting players to keep an eye on.
Nice. Okay, let's go to Browns at Raiders. The Raiders.
Baker time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Baker Mayfield came in last week. He had 200 passing yards. Didn't score any touchdowns, but he did lead the team to 4 straight scoring drives. And he just, like, the team just looked like a real football team the second he came onto the field. Like when Tyrod was on the field, they looked like the same old Browns, even though they have a bunch of playmakers at wide receiver and tight end. But yeah, the offense just looked so good with Baker Mayfield on the field. I think the one guy that's going to benefit the most from Baker being on the field is David Njoku. We were talking a little bit about Njoku earlier. Yeah, last week he was only targeted twice for 36 yards, but like I said, I think he's going to benefit big time from Baker being on the field. Last week was kind of a disappointment as far as Antonio Callaway goes. He got 10 targets, caught 4 of them for 20 yards. After he had that he caught that bomb in week 2 for the big touchdown, kind of disappointed. I was really looking for him to take another step forward. Jarvis Landry, another huge target game, 15 targets, caught 8 of them for over 100 yards. I think I saw he's got 35% of the targets on that team so far this season, which is a massive number. And with Josh Gordon leaving to go to New England, I don't see how that number goes down. I think it's going to stay there. I think he's obviously going to be heavily targeted every week. The one guy that I was kind of low on coming into this season just because I thought Duke Johnson was going to get used more is Carlos Hyde. So far this season, he's gotten plenty of touches every game. Last week he had 23 carries for about 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. He looked awesome.
I'm just going to say don't fall for that trap with Carlos Hyde. I'm a little worried that he's not going to keep up with that production that we saw last week. It was his birthday last week, and also his wife was having a baby while he was playing in the game. So it was not only his birthday game, but it was his baby game. So I think that accounts for the 2 touchdowns right there. So if you have some of these Browns guys, as Baker comes in and the offense evolves a little bit, I think be patient with them. If you have to take one this week because Jarvis Landry doesn't get all his targets or has some silly drops because him and Baker aren't on the same page, if you have Antonio Callaway or David Njoku, don't move on from them yet. Let's see what Baker does with those weapons. Give him a week, and then you can start making some of these decisions as we go into next week.
Yeah, and looking at the Raiders so far, they've been pretty good against tight ends. They 4th fewest fantasy points to tight ends so far. Their weakness is their run defense. So I think if Carlos Hyde's going to continue to get 20-plus carries every game, you can keep playing him until we see that carry share go more towards Chubb. I think Hyde will continue to be the running back to play on the Browns. And speaking of running backs that I was low on, Marshawn Lynch has made me look like an idiot. 19 carries last week, 60 yards and a touchdown. He's looked great so far. He's getting the touches. 3 straight weeks has led the team in carries. So if you have Marshawn Lynch, you can keep playing him. Doug Martin got 9 carries and was more efficient with them. He turned those into 43 yards, and Jalen Richard is obviously the guy that they target in the passing game when it comes to the running back. And the Browns actually allowed the 7th most receiving yards to running backs last year. So, so far this season, we saw them allow 11 yards per catch to James Conner in week 1. Kamara beat him up. So I think I think Jalen Richard is a play in PPR leagues. I think you can put him in your flex and get good flex production from him. Last week was tough for Amari Cooper. Only 5 targets, only caught 2 of them. We saw Jordy Nelson explode 170-something yards with a touchdown. I don't see that happening every week. So if you're the Amari Cooper owner, stick with him for another couple weeks. Yeah, we saw in week 2 he had that nice game. So hopefully we can see more games like that from him. Throughout the rest of the season, and hopefully we don't see Jordy Nelson eating into his target share anymore.
John Gruden's an old school style coach, so that is the kind of offense he is going to run. It's going to work the tight end. It's going to work a beast of a running back in beast mode.
Yeah, with a great offensive line.
Absolutely. So, as they continue to have success running the ball, they'll open it up play action wise and try and hit some of those Amari Cooper routes down the field, the Spider 2Y bananas.
Spider 2Y banana, yeah.
They will absolutely start opening up as this running game and middle of the field continues to find success for the Oakland Raiders.
When I was driving home today and I was thinking about the whole Le'Veon Bell trade stuff, maybe not for this season, but can you imagine Le'Veon Bell with a Raiders jersey on?
It's a very Raiders thing to do.
Yeah.
I mean,
if there's one team that likes to make a splash, and especially with them moving to
Vegas,
that would definitely help sell tickets.
They have some ammunition too, and all those first round picks they got back for Khalil Mack too.
Yeah, you're right, man. You're right.
Yeah, the war chest is ready to trade in Oakland.
So we'll see what happens. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty thirsty. What's your beer situation over there?
I could definitely use a beer. This is the Dudes and Beer podcast.
That it is, sir. That it is. Beer. So we are going to take a break real quick. We're going to come back in a couple minutes, and we're going to finish running through the rest of the game. So sit tight. We will be right back on the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football podcast. Welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for joining us for the rest of this Week 4 Week 4 preview here. We are going to start with the 49ers Chargers, which I see as being one of the most lopsided games on the slate this week. We saw Jimmy Garoppolo go down with an ACL tear last week, and we got
Matt Breida is banged up as well, trying to figure out if we can confirm for you all whether he's starting or
whether
sitting.
He's officially out yet or not. So C.J. Beathard will be starting at quarterback last year. He had a few games where he was not bad. I think he averaged around like 220 passing yards a game or something like that. Not horrible, but obviously not what we saw from Jimmy Garoppolo with the last 5 games of the season. Last week, Breida was the most efficient running back on the team, 10 attempts, 90 yards. But Alfred Morris led the team in carries, 14 carries for 67 yards. And if Breida's hurt again, and I'm pretty sure Alfred Morris is in there as has the questionable tag as well. So who knows who's going to be healthy there. Thank God we saw Goodwin come back. He had one of the cooler touchdown celebrations this week. Him and I forget what the teammate was, but one of the most ridiculous handshakes that you've ever seen.
Down by like 14 too, so good for them. Still having fun.
He's finally gets into the game. Finally gets into a game, scores a touchdown in his first game. I'm all for it. I got Goodwin in I think 3 of my leagues this year, so I'm nervous about the quarterback change, but I'm also happy to see that he came back and had a touchdown in his first game back. So the other guy that is really disappointing so far is George Kittle. He had not a bad game, especially considering what the tight end landscape looks like so far. But I just don't know what to make of his future with Beathard at quarterback. We'll have to give it a couple weeks to see, but it doesn't look all that bright there in San Francisco. So
if you're in a survivor pool, I think the Chargers are a good-looking pick this week. I'm going to be riding with them, so if they lose, we can sympathize next week. But I think the Chargers are going to roll this week.
If I didn't get knocked out by the Bills beating the Vikings last week in 3 different suicide pools, I'd still be in, but unfortunately I am not, like a lot of other people that I'm sure lost last week from whether it was the Jacksonville game or the Minnesota game or the Giants-Texans game, whatever it was. Suicide pools definitely took a huge hit last week. But, talking about the Chargers, obviously you're going to start Rivers. He's been great so far this season. The 49ers have given up the 7th most fantasy points to quarterback so far this season. Gordon is a must-play. Keenan Allen's a must-play. I think Mike Williams is creeping into the must-play, at least in a flex spot for sure, with those 2 touchdowns last week. I drafted Mike Williams, I think, in 4 of my leagues. I had to drop him in one of them because I got so many injuries in that one league. But he looked great. they're definitely excited about him in San Diego. And the other guy that I think is I don't know if he's a sleeper anymore, but definitely one guy that I think you can play in a flex spot and be happy with is Austin Eckler. Last week he got 7 touches, turned him into 70 yards. So if it's in a PPR league, you can definitely start him. So that pretty much does it for 49ers, Chargers. Start your Chargers. If you have to start a running back for the 49ers, I think it's going to end up being Morris. Were we able to figure out if anything's going on with Breida? Anything?
Breida, he was part of the group sitting at practice today. They still don't know. They do have a running back on their practice squad, so if you see him move up to the full squad and get signed off the practice squad by the 49ers, I think it would be safe to assume Breida would sit this week, and you should stay away from him. Again, I just think game flow, Breida is someone you're going to be able to avoid no matter what. The 49ers are going to be behind, and the Chargers are going to be able to take care of business this week.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to an NFC home game. We got the Buccaneers going to the Bears, whose defense has looked
magic,
awesome over there.
Magic. As we get into this Buccaneers-Bears game, just going to pour one out here on the Dudes and Beer podcast for Chris Conti.
R.I.P.
Vance McDonald. I mean, some people would say that he baptized him. I think he baptized him and also anointed the sick, because he killed Chris Conti on Monday Night Football. I saw it happen live. Everyone that was near me, I told them to stop what they were doing and look at the television, because another man just murdered someone on Monday Night Football.
It wasn't even one stiff arm. It was two stiff arms.
Succession. And then he's got a defensive tackle on the Steelers bench just like pointing at it like that was the coolest thing he will ever see in his entire life. And I absolutely believe that it was. It turns out Chris Conti was playing hurt with a knee injury that he also just re-aggravated. Not on the same play, so it's okay to make fun of the stiff arm play. But Chris Conti tried to gut one out, got his face smashed in, and then ended up ripping his knee up even more. So wishing him a speedy recovery. But
I feel like we've seen him get housed so many times, whether it was when he was on the Bears or now with the Buccaneers. He doesn't have the best luck.
No. Posters, lots of posters with Chris Conti on the
wrong
side of them.
Yeah.
So getting into this game, another nice sunny day for fantasy football in Chicago.
Chi-town.
The Bucs I'm going to watch. I drafted this guy in all the 2 leagues that I'm playing in, Chris Godwin. He is a developing star wide receiver, playing opposite Mike Evans, and he's actually listed as their number 3 receiver, but is actually playing more like a number 2.
He's targeted as the number 2.
If he's not on a roster yet in your league, absolutely pick this guy up.
For sure.
Play him this week if you need to. But I think you could actually just hold him on your team as someone to just keep as a viable fantasy option moving forward. On the Bears side, the Bears defense is a defense that I'm going to watch here. They lead the league in sacks. Fitzmagic does not like being under pressure, and we saw that last week on Monday night against the Steelers. I mean, some of those interceptions that he threw, it's because he had a hand in his face, and he doesn't like getting hit. The Bears are going to hit him, and they're going to hit him a lot. So watch out, because I think the Fitzmagic's wearing off, and I think the Bears defense is going to do a lot to wear it off even faster.
100% agree.
Trey Burton, if you need tight end help or just interested in a good backup tight end, I think he is emerging as a favorite target for Mitchell Trubisky. He led the team last week going 4 for 55. Chris Conti, again, we talked about him. He's out. He's done for the year. That's who would pick him up in coverage. So I think Trey Burton's going to have the opportunity to get a lot of targets this week and potentially find the red zone a couple times, and hopefully not on like a ridiculous shovel pass this time. Maybe they can throw him some actual like over the line of scrimmage.
Maybe he can run some real routes.
Yep.
I don't know who's been more disappointing on that Bears offense so far this season. It's either him or Tariq Cohen. Jordan Howard has made a lot of fantasy experts look like idiots in saying that he can't catch the ball and that he won't be involved in the pass game. I think he's benefited a lot from the new offense that they're running there in Chicago. And looking at the Bucs defense, They're in the top 10 in most fantasy points allowed this season to every single position group. So, the Bears' offense should be pretty good, and on top of their ferocious defense, I think this could be another one of these, just beat downs like we should see in Los Angeles with the Chargers as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to turn into the clock striking midnight and the Buccaneers turning back into the pumpkin that most people expected them to be. I mean, even though they're 3-0 right now, I don't think this team's going to win more than 6 games all year, and I think this is where it really starts to fall apart. Jameis is back in the facility now. So
2-1 actually, because they did lose to the Steelers.
2-1, right? So I don't think they're winning more than 6 games all year. Jameis is back in the facility now, so they're going to be questions every week if Fitzmagic doesn't play magical. That when's Jameis coming back? What are you doing with your quarterback? I think that's just going to start to eat at the fabric of this team. Losing a leader like Conte on defense, and they can't run the ball. You have to run the ball.
They have zero run game there.
So I don't like I don't really like the Buccaneers this week. Obviously, Mike Evans is a number 1 receiver, so you're playing him. But otherwise, I think this is the end of Fitzmagic. So if you've been playing him as like a streamer option or getting away with it for the first couple weeks of the season, playing him 400 yards each week is awesome. But I don't think he does it this week against the Bears.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that the Bucs do have going for him is the fact that the Bears are giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. So, that is their bread and butter with the Buccaneers. They like to throw the ball deep, and they definitely have the group of receivers and tight ends to do it. But, yeah, I think this is going to be a Bears trot, like, no matter what. Let's move on to the next game here. We got the Ravens going to play the Steelers, which I don't know about you, but, as a teenager, in my early 20s, this was the game, man. This was the game, especially for somebody that loves watching good defenses play. This should be, if they're going to try and play like old school Ravens Steelers football, this should be just a slobber knocker of a football game here.
If there's any game I just want to watch this week from a fan perspective, this is the game on Sunday Night Football that I'm definitely going to tune into and keep my eye on.
For sure. So the old first, let me ask you this: do you have Alex Collins in either of your leagues?
I don't, and it's a missed opportunity because I like him a lot.
So I have Collins in, I think, 4 of my leagues. I was super high on him coming into the season. And this Buck Allen fullback dive will never die. I don't know if there's ever been anything more frustrating in fantasy football than watching the Ravens give the ball to a 190-pound scat back and a fullback freaking power. He just keeps vulturing touchdowns from Alex Collins, but we did get to see Alex Collins, season high in carries, 18 carries, 68 yards, had a touchdown, was targeted 4 times. Yeah, he only caught 3 of them for 6 yards, but hopefully if we can see the Ravens in normal game scripts, I think this was the first normal game script, game flow that we've seen so far this season, and they gave him 18 carries. So hopefully we can see that more. The receivers there, Crabtree continues to be the most targeted receiver there. He got 10 targets last week, caught 7 of them. But John Brown, he is their lightning bug, I think you can call him. He's the guy that goes deep. He runs those deep seam routes and those post routes that I think Joe Flacco really loves to throw with that huge arm of his. So all 4 of those guys, I think you can play this week. Obviously, as a Collins owner, I hate to say it, but Buck Allen does have some PPR value. Obviously, in a standard league, I don't know if you can play him. He's got, last week, 6 attempts for 7 yards. I'm pretty sure on the season so far he's averaging about 2 yards a carry. So you can't count on him as a pure runner. But in the passing game, he is being targeted. Last week he had 4 targets. He had a touchdown catching and a touchdown, running in from the 1 yard line. But I think you could play either of those receivers, and hopefully, I think in a week or 2 we should see Hayden Hurst coming back, their rookie tight end, which I think throughout his career, Joe Flacco has definitely loved to throw to his tight end, whether it was Todd Heap or or whoever they had at tight end. So I think once he comes back, I think you might see a little bit of that Crabtree target share go towards that tight end. So, and then looking at the Steelers, man, Big Ben, he's been one of the best quarterbacks so far this season. 350 yards last week with a touchdown. Juju Smith-Schuster, I think, has really stood out the most on that Steelers team. I don't know if he's benefiting from Le'Veon not being there, or if it's just, the way that teams are deciding to roll coverage towards Antonio Brown with Le'Veon not being on the field. But last week 11 targets, he had 116 yards. I'm pretty sure he's in the top 5 or 6 for fantasy points so far for wide receivers. He's just been great. And Paul, as you mentioned earlier, that Vance McDonald stiff arm from hell. He had the touchdown, 112 yards. I think the Steelers brought him in for a reason last year. I think when healthy, I think Vance McDonald is the tight end to own on the Steelers. Jesse James had pretty good games week 1 and 2, but last week, only had that one target, caught it for 7 yards. Vance McDonald really 8. So I think Vance McDonald is really the tight end to go after in Pittsburgh, and I think he's not a bad DFS play this week either. With all that attention that defenses can now turn towards the receivers on this team, not worrying about Le'Veon. Not that James Conner isn't any good. Last week, 15 carries, 6 targets, caught 5 of them, had just about 100 yards, total yards. So, you can keep riding James Conner. Obviously, you're going to play Antonio Brown. He's a beast. Been the number 1 receiver for the past 3 or 4 years. You can't get away from him. But yeah, Big Ben, you can keep relying on him to spread the ball around to all those weapons that he has in Pittsburgh. Let's move on to a game that saw some a first in the last, I think it was 6 or 7 seasons. We saw a Lions running back have 100 rushing yards. It was pretty awesome.
That is my player to watch, ladies and gentlemen, on those Detroit Lions for this week. Kerryon Johnson. Have they found their lead back in Detroit?
I think they have, man.
First 100-yard game, as we were talking about, since Reggie Bush did it in 2013. Reggie. That is 70 games they played without a 100-yard rusher. Other thing I'm looking at, Cowboys fans, you know what this means, but Sean Lee is likely going to be out. So
he's killing me, and I have
Sean Lee, man,
that all IDP league, all individual defensive player league. Which, by the way, if anybody's interested, I haven't done enough work here repping that league, but I want to start another all individual defensive player league. Just give me a second, real, to run through what that means. So you're starting defensive players instead of offensive players. You're starting tackles, defensive ends, linebackers, safeties, corners, instead of obviously quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. It's a lot of fun. If anybody's interested in playing, you can hit me up on Facebook or Twitter. And next season, I'm looking to start a second all IDP league. But yeah, he's killing me this year. Last week I sat him because I thought he wasn't going to play, and then he had, I think it was 16 points, which in a defensive league, that's a hell of a lot of points. But yeah, so with him out, I think that helps Kerryon Johnson even more.
Absolutely. Yeah, so otherwise, Detroit Lions side of the ball, Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. Matt Stafford, if he's your starter and you've been rolling with him, continue to do it. They're going to throw the ball. They're in a dome. It'll be nice weather. It's in Dallas, and I know those afternoon games kind of get that weird glare on the field. Mm-hmm. It's not going to happen this 1 o'clock game. So
through God's window.
Yeah, right. You don't have to worry about that in Jerry's world this week.
I know as an Eagles fan, you probably hate the Cowboys more than anything in the world, but I absolutely love Jerry Jones, and I don't know if it's just because of the accent or what, but oh man, I think he's one of the best owners in sports.
Dude is a lunatic. I wish the Cowboys let him run the team instead of letting his son do it, because his son knows what he's doing. If Jerry Jones was running the team, Johnny Manziel would still be the quarterback, and the Cowboys would have the number 1 pick every year.
I think my favorite quote in sports in the past couple of years, I heard an interview with Jerry. He said, what did he say? Oh, what was it? Oh man, I can't believe I'm forgetting this. The stronger the hull of the ship, the better it can withstand the torpedo.
Yeah, that's Jerry Jones for you. That dude he needs to take a break. He can let his son take over the team, and they'd be in better shape. if they didn't have to still worry about Jerry Jones. But Cowboys side of the ball, players not named Zeke Elliott because he's really the only viable Cowboys fantasy option.
Yep.
If you need help this week, Tavon Austin, 2 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. One last week, one the week before. He seems like their only opportunity to score besides Zeke Elliott.
They seem to be getting really creative with the play calling.
Right, they're getting him the ball in interesting ways, either against the Giants, how they just threw it deep down the field, or on like reverses or quick little pitches in the backfield to get him in space and able to use that speed because he still has speed for days, but just can't get the ball to him. Jeff Swame, whatever his last name is, Swaim. He's probably the more reliable bet than a Tavon Austin. They're trying to find someone to replace Jason Witten. They didn't get to do it in the draft because the Eagles stole Dallas Goddard. He is named Dallas because his dad was a Dallas Cowboys fan, so that is true. But Jeff Swaim, safer bet than Tavon Austin, potential good tight end to pick up if you need help. If Jordan Reed, the Redskin tight end, is on your team, and obviously he's on a bye this week, if Jeff is available, go scoop him up. He was second on the team in targets last week with 7, and that was behind Zeke Elliott. So obviously Zeke is still the offense, but if Jeff's out there and you need something reliable, go pick him up. To avoid, I would just, if Dak is on your team, just drop him right now. There's no use in hanging on to him. He has no weapons, and that offensive line is not what it once used to be. He is getting a ton of sacks. Cowboys are somehow 3-point favorites in this game. I think it has a lot to do with the Lions coming off a big emotional win Sunday Night Football against the Patriots, with Matt Patricia going against the Jedi Master of Bill Belichick. Cowboys also are expected to play well at home, so I hate the Cowboys, so I'm going to say the Lions cruise in this one because there's no Sean Lee, and Cowboys fans will know what that means.
So are you – I know you mentioned Marvin Jones. Do you like Marvin Jones over Kenny Golladay?
I do like Marvin. I think Marvin just has a better relationship with Matt Stafford. I think you're starting to see Golladay develop into that big play receiver that's really going to start to replace a lot of what Golden Tate used to do, and that's why I think you're starting to hear – the trade rumors of Golden Tate could be someone that is moved before the trade deadline just because they like what they have in Marvin Jones and Golladay as like 2 big body receivers that can catch the ball and move the chains.
So you think Golladay has more of an effect on Tate than he does on Jones? Yeah,
no, I do. I think because Marvin Jones to me can play that role that Golden Tate does of catching the underneath routes and not just being the down the field guy. I think they're expecting Golladay to turn into that down-the-field guy, and that will give Marvin Jones the opportunity to take over more of what Golden Tate's been known to do, especially with Ebron gone. So a lot of those targets that Ebron would see, I think that's where the middle of the field is going, and for some reason or another, Golden Tate is someone that they think they might move on from, so Marvin Jones is filling that void.
Cool. It's an interesting take. For
Hot
sure.
Hot
takes, baby. Let's go to the Chiefs at Broncos, another AFC West showdown here. The Chiefs' defense is absolutely putrid, but it doesn't matter because they have probably the most exciting offense in football. Definitely the most exciting younger quarterback for sure. Setting records for most touchdown passes in his first 3 games, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, Patrick Mahomes, you're starting him. Kareem Hunt, you're starting him. Tyreek Hill, you're starting him. And obviously, Travis Kelce, you're starting too. The interesting guy to me is Conley there. He's had a touchdown in the past 2 games. Yeah, he was only targeted 3 times last week, but one of them was that red zone target. So I think for someone that's, if you just want to get any chunk or any piece of this Chiefs offense that you can, Conley's probably the only guy who's available. Maybe him or Sammy Watkins, and if Sammy wasn't drafted, but yeah, that's definitely an exciting offense there for sure. The one thing about this Chiefs offense that worries me is Kareem Hunt. It just seems like he's not involved in the passing game at all. which is super surprising, being that it is a Andy Reid offense, and we've seen what Andy Reid can do with running backs, especially in the pass game. You think of guys like Brian Westbrook, and you look at Shady McCoy towards the end of Andy Reid's tenure with the Eagles. So, Paul, as an Eagles fan, are you worried to see what Andy Reid is doing with Kareem Hunt and how he's just not involved? Do you think it's more of a Patrick Mahomes keeping his eyes downfield type of thing? Do you think it's a play calling thing? What do you think's going on with Kareem Hunt in Kansas City?
I think it is a lot of Andy Reid. If you look at Kareem Hunt last year, he came on the scene really strong and then just started to dip a little more each week that preceded it as they went further into the season. Andy Reid is a guy that falls in love with the pass play, so I don't expect him to start calling run plays anytime soon. They'll lose a game here because Mahomes threw 50 passes and completed less than 60% of them. When that happens, start Hunt the next week because Andy Reid is going to rely heavily on the run just to show everyone and shut the media up and say, hey, look, I do run the ball.
Yeah.
Until that happens, though, Kareem Hunt is still a running back too, in my opinion, because of what that offense is doing and how many points they're scoring. But Mahomes just does so much, either running the ball himself, moving around in the pocket, and just completing passes either down the field or short pass plays that then Kelsey breaks for a big gain and gets to move the sticks on. So Andy Reid likes to think of he's running the ball in other ways with that West Coast style of offense. Mm-hmm. So
the quick passes instead of the run play.
Yep. So that, I think, to me is what's eating into Kareem Hunt, but he's still not anyone I would move on from because of what that offense does point-wise.
I think it's the Kansas City defense that's hurting Kareem Hunt more than anything because, if the Chiefs defense was actually able to stop anybody, I think we would see, game flow with Chiefs up bigger. We'll see Kareem Hunt running the ball more to try and, put the game away, but it's just his lack of production in the pass game that really worries me. 3 targets this season through 3 games. It's weird because, he was so involved in the pass game last year, and it was a different quarterback, but I don't know what the hell's going on with them. And
that's Alex Smith's style of offense too. Yeah. He's the dink and dunk kind of guy. Mahomes has this cannon for an arm, so he's going to air it out. And, I mean, he might be the only guy in the league that could overthrow a Ty Hill.
Right.
So he's going to keep doing that. The Chiefs defense, I did see something this week that they're potentially interested in trading for Earl Thomas.
Really?
So they could get that much needed strength on the defense, and then.
Oh my God! You meant Eric Berry and Earl Thomas in the same.
That's a serious defensive safety backfield right there. So
with Kendall Fuller, who I think will emerge by the end of the season as a shutdown corner, but maybe a tight end eraser type of corner. But man, that would be interesting there. Earl Thomas over there. Damn.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens there.
On the Broncos side of the ball, freaking Phillip Lindsay, man. You get kicked out of the game. He had 4 attempts for 20 yards. He was looking great, and then he gets kicked out of the game for doing something stupid. I can't imagine what the Broncos coaching staff was saying to this kid throughout the week. But, for your Royce Freeman owners out there, you were obviously very pleased to see that. 13 carries, 1 target. He only had less than 60 total yards, but he got that touchdown, so kind of saved his production for the day. These receivers for the Broncos are just it's a weird situation. It's an interesting situation. You got this young guy, Courtland Sutton, looks great. I think he's going to continue to take away from Demaryius Thomas. I think by the end of the season, Demaryius Thomas will be the 3rd best receiver on the team. Emmanuel Sanders has definitely emerged as the top target guy, the red zone guy. Just he is the guy in the pass game, and I think it should remain that way. So if you got Sanders, keep playing him. This Chiefs defense, it's a great matchup, and possibly a waiver wire pickup if you need one at quarterback is Case Keenum. This should be another shootout. It is in Denver, so that should give a little, some help to the Broncos playing in that high altitude. But then again, it is the Chiefs. It's an AFC West matchup. They know what it's like playing in that altitude, so should be an interesting game for sure. Let us go to
Saints Giants.
Yeah, which should be probably the highest scoring fantasy game of the week, right?
I certainly think so. So if you think about it, out of their last 3 meetings, Saints and the Giants, and this is not consecutive seasons, but spread out over a couple years, the last 3 times the Giants and Saints have played, the Giants have hung 52 points on the Saints twice. So Big Blue knows how to score against the Saints. Those games turn into shootouts. OBJ, stardom. Sterling Shepard, stardom. Eli, I'm considering starting him over Aaron Rodgers this week just because I think it's going to turn into another shootout. It's up in the Meadowlands.
You believe in Eli.
Going to be a great day for football. I usually hate Eli Manning. I love all the stupid pictures of his face when he gets sacked or throws an interception. It's some of the best stuff I can ever look at. So Eli, all their receivers, start them. Saquon, he is definitely going to be in your lineup. Maybe he gets to run the ball this week against the Saints. We'll find out. But if anything, he's going to be utilized in the passing game and still be a weapon for the Giants. Rhett Ellison is someone I have potentially circled as tight end help if you need it. Again, if anyone's on a bye, Evan Ingram's going to miss some time, so Eli does like to throw to the tight end in the red zone, especially with so much focus being put on Sterling Shepard, OBJ, and now Saquon for potential receiving and running opportunities. On the New Orleans Saints side of the ball, since this is a shootout, Drew Brees should be in your starting lineup. Michael Thomas, Kamara, all those guys going to have big days. The kind of sleepers that I'm looking at here, Cameron Meredith, he's someone that I drafted, and every league that I draft him in, people are like, who the hell is that? Cameron Meredith, he's a talented wide receiver that came over from the Bears, big body guy, ended up blowing his knee out last season with the Bears. He was recovering from that, inactive, I think, the first 2 weeks with the Saints, caught a touchdown last week on his only target, so I think he could end up emerging as the Saints' kind of number 2, number 3 guy with Michael Thomas and Ted Ginn is just like the deep threat play on the team. So I like Cameron Meredith moving forward. If he's available, scoop him up, be patient with him, and see what he can turn into. And then Ben Watson, tight end wise, another option for this week. I think there's a lot of really good tight end options out there, obviously. But Ben Watson has proven to have the trust of Drew Brees, which goes a long way for Saints tight ends. If you think of Jimmy Graham and everyone thinking that Jimmy Graham and Drew Brees are going to set the world on fire, and it never, I mean, it was that, and then Jimmy Graham moved on, and they brought in all these other tight ends that never really could replicate the volume that a Jimmy Graham was seeing from Drew Brees. Ben Watson has kind of done that, so he's a good, trustworthy tight end option for this week if you need one.
Yeah, it is his second time around with the Saints. One thing looking at fantasy points allowed so far this season that really surprised me is the Giants. Last year, I know in the one of the first episodes of this podcast, me and Adam were talking about the Giants' defense when it comes to tight ends last year. You know, he used to just stream tight ends that are playing the Giants in daily fantasy, and he did really well. But so far this season, the Giants have allowed the fewest fantasy points to tight ends after last year allowing the most fantasy points to tight ends, which is crazy. But, you know, that's tight end for you. And it's impossible to predict tight ends. Besides the top 3 tight ends in Gronk, Kelsey, and Ertz, it's like it's a separate game. You know, it's trying to figure out what tight ends are going to be good week to week is almost impossible. So
I don't know if I can name the 3 tight ends that the Giants have faced this season, from the Jags to the Cowboys to the Texans last week.
Yeah, I mean, so the Texans have Ryan Griffin, who didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Cowboys have that guy Swam that you mentioned, didn't really do anything, and then. Who was it week 1 that they played?
They played the Jags week 1.
Jags. Oh yeah, and Austin Safarian-Jenkins. He had a touchdown that was called back. So yeah, maybe this is an example of how, you know, looking at fantasy points allowed throughout the season is not a very good measure, because like you said, the last 2 teams they played, they didn't really use their tight end all that much. So maybe that's why that stat looks like that. But they've also given up. They're in the top 10 in fewest fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks and wide receivers as well. So, yes, I think this is going to be a shootout, but I don't know if it's going to be as high scoring of a shootout as some people have it. I know I'm in this one parlay ticket pool, and I think the over for that game is the highest of the week. So I may just be contrarian and take the under for that one, just because I'm looking at the defenses here. The Saints third fewest to running backs, and as we talked about, Saquon Barkley is definitely involved in the passing game there, and then eighth fewest points to tight ends for the Saints as well. So
the over for that game is 52 points. It's actually second highest in the league going into Sunday, with Atlanta and Cincinnati.
Oh yeah, true. That should be
the over is 54 for that game. So,
and speaking of that game, why don't we just move on to that game? Because like you said, if you have Breeze, Kamara, or Thomas, you're going to start him. And actually, Michael Thomas is on pace to make some history this season. So he's got 40 targets so far this season. He only needs 8 more catches per game to break Marvin Harrison's record. So that could be something cool to keep an eye on for, especially as you mentioned, their second and third receivers, Cam Meredith coming off of this ACL, and Ted Ginn is more so just a bigger version of Deshaun Jackson running nothing but go routes.
There's one receiver on the Saints, and
it's Michael Thomas, and he's getting the targets, he's getting the touchdowns because he's the best. And as you mentioned, the game with the biggest over for this week is the Bengals Falcons, which I think is going to be an absolute barn burner. The defenses on this, neither defense has really stood out at all. The Falcons have been pretty good against tight ends, so I'm not sure if Tyler Eifert is the best play this week. But with AJ Green beat up, and if he misses, then I think Eifert jumps right into the red zone third down target there, and I think Andy Dalton will really target him if AJ Green is out. But
Tyler Boyd's a good one to watch if he's out there on your waiver wire, if no one picked him up this week. He's looked really good for the Bengals, really solidifying that number 2 role, because again, John Ross is really just a stretch the field gadget kind of guy. So Tyler Boyd, great option out there if you need some wide receiver help, especially if this is going to be a shootout. He could be in line for a lot of targets, a lot of points.
For sure, yeah. 6 catches on 7 targets last week, 132 yards with the touchdown. The thing to watch out for here, I think, is in the run game. Will Mixon return? There's some speculation that he might be able to play this week after that arthroscopic cleanup surgery that he had 2 weeks ago. But if he doesn't play, I think Gio, as you mentioned earlier on in the podcast, I think Gio should have another great game. Last week he had 9 targets and he had 5 catches on 9 targets. He had 12 attempts, had just under 85 total yards. He had the touchdown. Last week Andy Dalton threw 4 interceptions, but he did have 2 touchdowns and over 350 pass yards. So you're looking at these 2 quarterbacks last week. Let's see, 6, 7. Between the 2 of them, they threw for over 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. So, yeah, I think the idea of a shootout is definitely pretty big here. You look at the running backs on the Falcons side. I'm pretty sure Freeman's not going to be able to play again, so it's going to be the Coleman show again. He had 15 carries and 3 targets. It did get that touchdown in the past game, but his yardage wasn't all that great. But being that it's most likely going to be a shootout, I think Coleman could have another good game. Calvin Ridley, 3 touchdowns, 150 yards, 7 catches on 8 targets. He looked absolutely amazing. So we'll see if they can keep that going, if he has maybe jumped over Mohamed Sanu as the number 2 wide receiver there. So keep an eye on that for sure. And I think the best matchup in this game, is Austin Hooper playing, tight end for the Falcons. The Bengals so far this season have given up the most fantasy points to tight end. So that might be a deep dive. That might be a super low-value DFS play, but Austin Hooper may be a guy to target this week at the tight end position. The the last NFC home game that we have here, or I'm sorry, not the last, but
we got the Cardinals at home against the Seahawks.
Yeah.
Afternoon game, early afternoon game. It's the 4 o'clock first of the 4 o'clock window. Out in the desert where, starting with the Seahawks, Russell Wilson thrives in the desert. He just absolutely balls out against the Cardinals. He has more TD passes against the Cardinals than any other team in the league.
That's awesome.
So Russell Wilson must start for this week. Flip a coin receiver-wise. Tyler Lockett has shown a lot of flashes, and I think he is something to keep an eye on. But
3 touchdowns, 3 games.
Yeah, Russell Wilson spreads the ball out, especially because Doug Baldwin is not there. So is this the week Brandon Marshall has a bunch of TD catches? I don't know, but Russell Wilson's going to be the one throwing them, so he is a must-start for me. Chris Carson also, last week, he had 32 touches, which was the most any running back has gotten all season across all 32 teams. Arizona is giving up the most points to opposing running backs, so I'm a big fan of Chris Carson this week. Start him in all of your leagues. The Cardinals, unless they're infused by some Josh Rosen quarterback change, they'll probably be behind. They're not a very good football team. They don't know what they're doing on offense. So the Seahawks should be up, and they should look to salt away the game with Chris Carson. Cardinals to look at, I'm saying David Johnson and Larry Fitz. They might have some upside with this QB change happening. We talked earlier about Baker and the Browns and holding on to those players, not trading them or panicking yet. Let's see what a new quarterback can do. Let's see if they can infuse some life into those 2 players, because David Johnson's a beast and should be performing way above than what he's doing. I think he has 1 touchdown all season so far. And Larry Fitz is too good of a player, future Hall of Famer, to be as absent as he's been in the first 3 weeks of the season so far. So if they're out there, I am trying to buy David Johnson low. If you have any depth on your team that you think you can trade for a David Johnson type player, sell someone high, I would try and do that. But let's see. Hopefully Rosen can play for David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald owners. I am a Larry Fitzgerald owner in both my leagues, so certainly hoping Rosen breathes some life into this game. Seattle wide receivers, again, they're a coin flip here. So if you go with Lockett, if you pick up Brandon Marshall and try him out, Russell Wilson's going to throw a lot of TD passes. So one of those guys has to be catching them unless it's the tight end. Otherwise, I think Cardinals get rolled over here by the Seahawks, and I expect Russell Wilson to have a big game.
Yeah, to that point, the Cardinals have given up the 9th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers this year, but I don't know if it's because of Patrick Peterson or their ability to stop wide receivers, or it's just the fact that they've given up the most fantasy points to running backs. Chris Carson last week, as you mentioned, 32 attempts, 100 yards, touchdown. I'm hoping that after this game he has another big game, so that way we know in Seattle who the running back is. They drafted Penny this season. I think they were hoping to, have some competition in that running back room. But I think Chris Carson has, at least after last week, he's definitely gained the trust. I mean, you don't give a running back 32 carries if you don't trust him.
Right.
And hopefully in this matchup against the team that's given up the most fantasy points to running backs, hopefully he can capitalize on that. As far as Tyler Lockett goes, I mean, yeah, he's had a touchdown in the first 3 games of the season. I don't know if I see that continuing, but if you're looking at who's the best pass-catching player on that team, I think it's Tyler. It's Lockett for sure. So.
And he's one of those guys, too, that, I mean, Russell Wilson is going to scramble around. He's going to do ridiculous things in the pocket. And if someone's going to get open downfield, it's going to be Lockett. So he's got the speed and the quickness to extend plays and get open, especially when Wilson is scrambling around. So if you're starting one of those wide receivers knowing that there's a good Cardinals secondary, I would make Lockett the choice.
For sure. Let's go to – this is the last game we have, isn't it? Oh, man, wow. So we got the Bills going to the Packers. I don't know about you, but I don't see the Bills going on 2 straight away games and pulling upsets. But if LaShawn McCoy is out again with this fractured rib cartilage that he's got or whatever, I think Chris Ivory is a viable play, especially in a standard league, maybe not so much in a PPR league because, he got four targets, caught 3 of them, and had 70 receiving yards, but I think 50-something of them were all on one play. If it wasn't for that one catch, his yardage would look like crap, but 20 carries is nothing to sneeze at. So if, like I said, if McCoy is out, Ivory is definitely someone you can trust. I honestly don't understand how the Bills won this game when you look at their best offensive players. Like, Kelvin Benjamin had 3 catches for 29 yards. Charles Clay had 2 catches for 18 yards. How the hell did they put up 30-something points?
Josh Allen, baby. It was the Josh Allen show.
And like you were saying before with, hopefully Josh Rosen can come in and bring some excitement to that offense and maybe give some a boost in value to guys like especially Fitz.
Yeah.
The Bills showed that, you play a rookie quarterback that has big-time talent, he can do some awesome things, and last week was definitely a great example of that. He only threw the ball 22 times, had 196 yards and a touchdown, but they beat the Vikings pretty convincingly. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. He could be maybe a quarterback to stream throughout the season if he can do that against the Vikings. Probably do it against other teams too, but. We'll see. Maybe some defenses around the league can get some more tape on him and then figure out.
What do you think? Do you think Clay Matthews sacks him and gets a 4th consecutive roughing the passer?
Not, bro. Coming into the season, I thought that lowering the helmet thing was going to be a bigger issue than this
roughing
landing
the passer
on the
is ridiculous.
Dude, it's so absurd, man. Like, I get it. You don't want players putting their weight on quarterbacks. We obviously don't want to see Aaron Rodgers go out for the season with a broken collarbone, but you have to let these defensive players play. Right. Like, I have a feeling at some point this season, you're going to see a defensive player come in free, whether it's, on a corner blitz or it's, they scheme up and they get a linebacker free. Somebody's going to hit a quarterback, or they're going to be about to hit a quarterback, and they're going to, try and avoid him, and they're going to get hurt because they're trying to avoid hurting the quarterback. And I get it, the league wants, the more teams are scoring, the more fun it is to watch football, I guess. But, like, at some point, you have to let these guys play football. And, it's not flag football. It's not touch football. This is professional football. They hit each other. Like, these defensive players, these linemen, that's what they get paid to do. They get paid, especially the edge rushers, they get paid to hit the quarterback. So I just really hope that they figure out something to keep from these Pro Bowl type defensive linemen from getting all these ridiculous calls. But yeah, I mean, you look at the Packers defense so far this year, giving up the 5th most fantasy points to both quarterbacks and wide receivers. So not that the Bills really have anything at wide receiver to really threaten the Packers with, but I hope that the Packers just come out and absolutely dominate this game. Aaron Rodgers last week, he had 2 touchdowns, threw the ball 44 times, which was kind of surprising to me. I thought maybe with Aaron Jones returning that maybe they would rely on the run game a little bit more. But another thing that's kind of discouraging to me is looking at how they used all 3 running backs. Montgomery got 4 attempts. Williams had 5, and Aaron Jones had 6. So Aaron Jones was definitely the most efficient on the ground game, but obviously if you have Adams, you're going to play him. And an awesome thing we saw last week was one of my favorite players in fantasy this week, just solely because it's so much fun to say his name, Geronimo. Yeah, he caught that touchdown on that 50-something, 60-something yard pass, and Randall Cobb had a fumble, so I don't know how much that will affect his production and his target share, but last week he did lead the team in targets with 11 to Adams' 9. So it's going to be an interesting game there to see, especially in the run game for the Packers. As a Aaron Jones owner, and I think 2 of my leagues, I'm really hoping that they go, okay, John, I'm really hoping they say to Jamal Williams, hey, you had your chance, you didn't really show us anything, so we're giving the ball to Aaron Jones, and we're going to let him do work, because I think he's obviously the most talented running back there in Green Bay. So that will conclude the Week 4 preview episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. I want to thank my buddy Paul here for joining us again. I hope this was fun for you, and I hope you can join us more in the future for this podcast.
I had a blast. Hopefully some of these hot takes will help all of you out in Week 4, either daily fantasy or for your leagues itself. Hopefully I can get off the schneid of my 0-3 team.
Hopefully, man.
I will definitely report back on that, and it was great hanging out with all you guys. Thank you.
So that is the Week 4 episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. Be sure to tune in to the Dudes and Beer the Dudes and Beer Podcast on Tuesday nights to get our waiver wire preview for Week 5. We talked a lot about the waiver wire so far in this episode. It's definitely important, so you're going to want to tune in for that. And definitely tune in next week for the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Week 5 preview. Take it easy, everybody. Hopefully this week goes well for you, and maybe we can see some awesome stiff arms like we saw some from Vance McDonald again this week. So take it easy, good luck, and keep rocking.
Go Birds.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dudes and Beer Fantasy Football Podcast. To listen to our episodes or chat with us live, download the official Dudes and Beer app, available on Android and iDevices, or visit us online at dudesandbeer.com. You can also find all of our episodes on Breach.tv, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, SoundCloud, or your favorite podcast service. Dudes and Beer is a proud member of the HC Universal family of podcasts. For more about our sponsors, podcasts, and other content, visit hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app. Thanks for listening, everybody. And until next time, drink responsibly.